Good evening, and welcome to the first American Jewish woman novelist, uncovering the story of Cora Wilburn and her spiritualist novel, Cosella Wayne. This evening's webinar is hosted by the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center at New England Historic Genealogical Society. My name is Rachel King. I'm the director of the center, and I'll be your moderator this evening. The Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center is a destination for exploring and preserving the history of Jewish families and institutions in New England and beyond. We are an archive, educational center, and family history resource located at New England Historic Genealogical Society, America's founding genealogical organization. This evening, we will hear from Professor Jonathan Sarna about his discovery of a previously unknown and groundbreaking 19th century novel, and the fascinating Jewish American woman who wrote it. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few notes about this webinar. You in the audience will be muted throughout. If you have questions during Professor Sarna's presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type them in, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. I also want to note that we are broadcasting remotely from home, so please bear with us if we experience any technological issues, and we thank you in advance for your patience. Even if we do lose the connection, or if you miss something on your end, you'll have access to the full recording of this session afterward. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our presenter this evening. Dr. Jonathan Sarna is a leading scholar of and commentator on American Jewish history, religion, and life. He is university professor and the Joseph H. and Bell R. Braun Professor of American Jewish History at Brandeis University, where he also directs the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. Professor Sarna is chief historian of the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia. He has written, edited, or co-edited more than 30 books and has been named one of the 50 most influential Jews in America. Professor Sarna also serves on the advisory council here at the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center and is an invaluable advisor and friend to us. We are so delighted to host him this evening and to learn more about Cora Wilburn. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Sarna.
Well, thank you, and really a delight to be here, and I want to thank Rachel for that wonderful introduction. The first time that I spoke about this subject, which was at a very prestigious lecture at Columbia University, I managed to trip on an uneven stage during the question period and ended up in the emergency room. So I want to commend the organizers this evening for ensuring that there is no stage. I can sit at my desk and speak from home. COVID time does have that silver lining. Now, my subject, as you heard from Rachel, is a completely unknown 1860 American Jewish novel entitled Cosella Wayne. I think we have a slide of the novel. And there's the author, Cora Wilburn, in the second position on the right. That is the only known picture of Cora Wilburn. And if you ask later, I'm happy to say I had to discover it. It was really tough. But there is her picture. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the book. And there it is, Cosella Wayne. It was originally published serially, month by month, in the Spiritualist Journal, The Banner of Light. I believe this to be the very first novel written and published in English by an American Jewish woman writer, and it actually revises the whole chronology of American Jewish literature. But it's not really just the early date that makes Cosella Wayne significant. The novel, which is an autobiographical novel set in the 1840s, really opens up a whole world of which we know very little. It's a world of crooked gem dealers who travel to exotic places, Australia, India, Venezuela, visiting Jews in each one. A world where a Jewish child might be rescued from her non-Jewish father so that it might be raised by Jewish parents. A world where a Jewish father molested his daughter, and a world where that daughter took solace in the new heavily female movement known as Spiritualism, becoming for time among its best known writers. Now, the remarkable author of Cosella Wayne was a woman who published under the not very Jewish name, Cora Wilburn. Her original name, I discovered, was Henrietta Pulvermacher. Pulvermacher means powder maker. I recently published, you can see it on your screen, an annotated edition of Cosella Wayne with the University of Alabama Press. And there you can read my full introduction to the novel, as well as selections from Cora Wilburn's diary, which I likewise discovered. Tonight, owing to the constraints of time, my agenda is a little more modest. I want to introduce you to Cora Wilburn and the novel and recount my discovery of the novel and the diary. So, who was Cora Wilburn? She was born on December the 1st, 1824, and she listed her birthplace at different times as either Germany or France, which means she probably was born in Alsace, which went back and forth. She was fluent in German, had some knowledge of French, Spanish, Yiddish, but she considered her mother tongue to be English, and it may well be that her birth mother was from England. That is certainly what she claimed in the novel. Cora Wilburn's father, whom she absolutely despised, and whose name she subsequently discarded, was an unscrupulous gem dealer and con man, as well as an abusive father and husband. He remarried following the untimely death of his first wife, but he maintained his criminal ways. In 1837, the London Gazette listed him as an insolvent debtor and prisoner named Mas Pulvermacher. 6 years later, papers in Burma and Sydney, Australia, portrayed the same man as Moritz Pulvermacher. Under the headline, and we have a slide for this, Tricks of a Traveler, the article described how opulently attired and in the company of his wife and daughter, Moritz claimed to be a rich diamond merchant and swindled people by taking loans that he did not repay and by supplying them in pledge false stones, counterfeit gold, and faux silver. At one point, he even impersonated Sir Moses Montefiore, the foremost British Jew of his time. He also paraded for a while as, quote, an American Jew named Moritz Jackson, precisely the same last name, revealingly, that his daughter subsequently used when she immigrated to America. We'll see that later. Even in an age like the first half of the 19th century, when self-fashioning was something of a social norm, and Jews in particular changed their ways and their names in quest of social and economic mobility, this case of Cora Wilburn was extreme. Ultimately, Moritz settled in the Venezuelan port of La Guaira, which is near Caracas, and that's where the, quote, Jackson family took up residence in 1844. The surviving volume of Cora Wilburn's diary, written while she was still calling herself Henrietta, commenced in La Guaira, 1844. It began on February the 28th, and it painted a grim picture of her Jewish family, far different from the idealized Jewish family that so many 19th century Jewish writers and artists celebrated. I'll quote a bit. "I'd not been home long yesterday, but it began anew," so she reported cryptically on March 1844. A week later, she explained that she and her father had again had a most tremendous row, as usual for nothing. The brandy bottle was applied, and so began his cursing and bellowing. It continued till near morning. Within months, the situation at home deteriorated further. Her father, perhaps fearing that discovery of his crimes was near, turned violent. He began to take a knife up to my mother, meaning stepmother, so we both left the house. Now, in Cosella Wayne, you can keep going, another slide, Cora Wilburn elaborated on the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her father through the voice of an alter ego. Next slide, her central character, whose name was Cosella Wayne in the novel. Cosella Wayne bore the very same initials, CW, and you can see it on the screen. This is how it looked when it appeared. Cosella Wayne bore the same initials as the author, CW. The novel described the threats, the screams, the assaults, the beatings that Cosella endured. The tension at home likewise took a physical toll on Cosella's stepmother. Her health declined. She could no longer keep house. Finally, on June the 29th, 1844, according to Cora Wilburn's diary, her stepmother departed this life for a better. God gave her a calm and peaceful end. Following this death, according to both the diary and the novel, conditions only became worse. Enraged that his daughters not only refused to assist him in his crimes, but also spurned the much older man whom he selected to be her husband, Cora's father threatened her physically and then drove her from the house. In 1845, Moritz Jackson, née Pulvermacher, died. Rumors abounded that he had been murdered. The orphaned Henrietta, as she still was then known, lost everything upon her father's death. Whatever of value he may have owned was stolen. "My little fortune is irrevocably lost," she wrote to her diary in anguish. "Alas, I am being doomed to misfortune. her days as a gentlewoman raised in a home with servants and the visible accoutrements of wealth ended abruptly. She found herself practically penniless. Adrift in the world and taken in by sympathetic Catholic neighbors, Henrietta succumbed to pressure from those around her, and on June the 24th, 1846, she converted to Catholicism. "I had repented before it began," she subsequently admitted to her diary, but it was now too late. My word had been given. She soon attributed manifold misfortunes to this act of apostasy, describing it as, quote, "an event that has called upon me the just anger of a most just God. Despairing of the fatal day, I changed my pure and holy religion for a false one." She vowed 18 months later to return, although alone, friendless, and penniless, to my religion, to my God. And here is where she turned to Yiddish in her diary. Let's look at that. Next slide, please. You can see the Yiddish at the very top. I was thrilled to see it because it told me quite a lot about it. It's hard to read for those who know Yiddish. It's kind of original spelling. It's halting Western Yiddish, and she wrote it phonetically. But you can see, if you know some Yiddish, that she wrote prayerfully in her diary to the dear God of Israel, besieging him to save her and to enfold her again within his sacred love. She considered hers to have been an almost unpardonable, she considered hers to have been an almost unpardonable act of betrayal. Apostasy, like bastardy in the 19th century, was a sin that one could never live down. So, in hopes of improving her situation and returning to her people, and buoyed by the traditional belief that fellow Jews would embrace and uplift one of their own, Henrietta spent $40 of her remaining funds and took to sea for a final time, hoping to make a fresh start as a Jew in Philadelphia, about which she had read. She arrived in New York on September the 30th, 1848, and reached Philadelphia that same night. Come to the next slide, please. And here you can see from Ancestry, they actually have the date wrong. I checked the original, it should be September the 30th. A reminder, if they're a genealogist, that sometimes there are mistakes. But in any case, here you can see, backing up everything else in the diary, she arrived on the very ship mentioned in the diary, and how old she is, and so on. So she arrives in New York, reaches Philadelphia, and over the ensuing days, her faith in a Jewish moral economy based on mutual assistance was cruelly shattered. Went to the houses of my brethren, was but ill received, alas, she reported sadly to her diary. Philadelphia's Jews only offered her menial labor. Now, so far as I know, until now, all of the descriptions of the female Jewish poor in Philadelphia have stemmed from the ladies bountiful who aided them, people like the famous aristocratic philanthropist Rebecca Gratz. But in Cosella Wayne, Cora Wilburn gives voice to the poor themselves, allowing us to see class relations among Jewish women through the eyes of those who toiled to survive. And there's lots of material about that in the introduction and in the novel, how she's treated, how she ekes out a living, and so on. After 4 years of mind-numbing toil, Henrietta broke free of her hated needle. She'd been, like so many others, in the clothing trade, sewing to stay alive. Aided by Christian friends, she became a professional writer and really began life anew. And she would, from now onward, be known only by her pen name, which was Cora Wilburn. That soon became her legal name, listed in official censuses and also on her death certificate. Just like her father, who often took on new names to hide from pursuers, she apparently hoped that by changing her name, she would change her fortune. As a writer, and it's worth remembering that writing is really one of the few occupations that a woman of that time could take up with pride. As a writer, she aligned herself for about 17 years with the fast-growing but very controversial Spiritualist movement, which held that the spirits of the departed lived on in a distinct spirit world from which they continued to communicate with human beings. Nourished by the very same upstate New York soil as the women's rights movement, spiritualists advocated women's rights. It's really a remarkable faith because of the number of women who play central roles. And the spiritualists also treated women on a par with men in their practices, policies, ideologies. Wilburn didn't become a professional medium or trans lecturer as the movement's most famous women did. Some will know the name Victoria Woodhull, who actually was the first woman who ever ran for president and was a spiritualist and a trans lecturer and very famous or notorious, depending on your outlook, and made a lot of money. But instead, Cora Wilburn mostly reached people through her voluminous writings. She wasn't really a success as a lecturer, but she was a great success in print and published regularly in spiritualist magazines such as the Banner of Light and the Agitator. Wilburn was one of a comparatively small number of Jews who identified with spiritualism, not a lot of Jewish spiritualists. She never denied her Jewish heritage. In fact, in this novel, she celebrates it. But much like Jews who would later participate in movements like Unitarianism or ethical culture or Christian Science, or even in our day in Buddhism, she insisted that her liberal spiritualist faith required her only to be true and pure and to live the life that is approved of God and angels. Now, Cora Wilburn's productivity during these years is absolutely astonishing. Serialized novels, lengthy translations from German and French, colorful short stories, pointed nonfiction essays, hundreds of poems. They just flowed. She had an inexhaustible pen. I don't think any 19th century American Jewish woman wrote more and published more than she did. And all these writings together, and if anybody's looking for a doctoral dissertation, there's plenty of stuff to read. I have it all. They reveal Cora Wilburn to being a staunch advocate for social justice. She's really a forgotten foremother of 20th century liberal Jewish activism. She spoke out boldly against Black slavery before and during the Civil War. And in addition, as early as 1860, other forms of social injustice likewise drew her sharp rebuke. Let me quote. She attacks the hard-heartedness of landlords, the tasking of the wretched seamstress, the burdening of orphans and widows with the double weight of humiliation and toil, the contemptuous treatment of dependents, the starvation wages that force young women into paths of degradation. Against all of these outrages, she concluded, my soul protests. Now, in 1868, Cora Wilburn gathered funds sufficient enough to publish, next slide please, a small book of her poems entitled The Spiritual Significance of Gems. She'd learned about gems in her father's house, but where he used those precious stones to profit and deceive, she looked upon them as spiritual preceptors, each imbuing its wearer with a moral lesson. So, sapphire, trust in heaven; diamond, spiritual purity, and so forth. The spiritual significance of gems, like most published volumes of poetry, even in our day, brought its author neither fame nor fortune. Yet the volume was noticed by the American Israelite, the Reformed Jewish newspaper founded by Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise in Cincinnati, and significantly, the newspaper identified Cora Wilburn as a Jew. We are sorry, it wrote, to see so gifted a daughter of Zion being deluded by the heathen demonology of frustrating imposters, which was the way he described spiritualism. Notwithstanding the spiritualist teachings reflected in her poems, Cora Wilburn, by the time her book appeared, had actually grown disenchanted with the spiritualist movement. And the reason, I think, is that investigators in those days had shown that the mysterious rapping sounds that once held believers like Wilburn in thrall were nothing more than noise produced by the vigorous cracking of toe joints. Try it and see if you can make a lot of noise. Other spiritualist demonstrations likewise turned out to be reproducible tricks rather than manifestations of a spirit world beyond ordinary perception. Internal controversies also weakened the movement, particularly well-publicized battles concerning the shocking issue of free love. So it was that Wilburn left spiritualism and found her way back to Judaism. Next slide, please. This is one of the most amazing little letters that you'll find in a magazine. This is from the Banner of Light, the Spiritualist magazine, and part of it reads, "Urged by the strongest convictions of right and duty, I have returned to the faith I was born and educated in, namely the Jewish religion." Date here is November the 13th, 1869. Cora Wilburn explained that she now identified with its progressive ranks, not its so-called Orthodox standard, and that Reform Judaism accepted all enlightenment and welcomes every truth tending to exalt the material and the spiritual life of our aspiring humanity. And she promised to continue to labor for the pure, the true, the beautiful, to the best of her humble capacities, but would henceforward do so as an identifying Jew. And for the next 37 years, living right here in the Boston area, she did identify as a Jew. She no longer produced much in the way of fiction or critical essays. Instead, the bulk of her writing consisted of poetry. And over time, she becomes increasingly bitter and reclusive. Quote, "Were I not bound by woman's fate that keeps me here inactive, while man grandly reaps, I would in Israel's sweet and holy name hope to enkindle the world's freedom flame." So one of her poems exclaimed, and you get a sense of her bitterness, her age, her sex, her ill health, her poverty. They precluded her from doing more to advance the great social causes that she cherished. Instead, she spent most of her time in the Boston area caring for beloved animals. That was her lifelong passion, reading widely, and writing Jewish-themed poetry. Thanks to a long letter that she sent to her friend, Rabbi Bernard Felsenthal of Chicago, we know that she was supported by the Jewish community during her declining years. The banker Jacob H. Schiff sent her a monthly check of $10, and the Hebrew Benevolent Society of Boston, headed by Jacob Hecht, I should say, all of those documents of the Hebrew Benevolent Society, the ancestor of Jewish philanthropy and CJP here in Boston. They're all in our archive here in the Weiner Center. But they granted Cora Wilburn $8 a month, and she took the money even though she found it dreadful to be on the receiving end of public charity. And she receives occasional commissions for poems and money for caring for beloved pets. What interested me is that she assured Rabbi Felsenthal that she remained true to her faith. Quote, "I observe the Shabbos," meaning the Sabbath, "conscientiously, the Pesach, Passover, and the holy days. I keep Yom Kippur as would the most rigidly orthodox." Cora Wilburn died in Duxbury, Massachusetts on December the 4th, 1906. She had just turned 82, so all that careful living of hers, she was a vegetarian and had all sorts of modern beliefs about how to live a long time, and it paid off. She lived to be 82 in deference to her express wishes, rooted in late 19th century environmental values, albeit in violation of Jewish law. She was cremated. If we can look at the next slide, please. She is reputedly, there you have it, the death. This is the Cremation Society. Reputedly, she is the first person of Jewish faith ever cremated in Boston. Now, you may wonder, how did I discover all of this? And the answer is, I've been stalking Cora Wilburn for years. Her name sits on several lists of 19th century Jewish women writers. They're very short lists, but unlike, say, Emma Lazarus, who's usually at the top of the list, nobody knew anything about Cora Wilburn. There's no listing for her in the Jewish Women's Archive or in the encyclopedic Jewish Women in America. I just wrote the article, so soon there will be an article, but they didn't know anything about her. Early on, I found some of her poems in late 19th century Jewish periodicals like the Menorah, and then I found a very interesting and really intriguing letter that she wrote to a young woman named Henrietta Zold, later, of course, the founder of Hadassah, extolling Henrietta Zold's efforts in behalf of our unfortunate Jewish brethren of Russia. And then I read the early 20th century Boston writer and immigration rights activist Mary Anton, sad account of her own visit to Cora Wilburn, whom she described as the most interesting woman I know in many respects. Pretty fascinating. Mary Anton knew a lot of people. And I found a few other references, and each time I would file the reference in my Cora Wilburn file, hoping for a eureka moment, and that would bring everything together. A few years ago, I was invited to join a group at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Jerusalem devoted to the study of what they call Jewish women's cultural capital. It seemed like too good an opportunity to pass up, so I recklessly announced that I would see what I could find about Cora Wilburn. I dug out my file, and I recruited 2 Brandeis University students to help me scour the internet for other references. The good thing about Cora Wilburn, it's a very unusual name. But what popped up when we started looking on the internet astonished everyone. Hundreds of pages of small print prose and poetry that she wrote spread over a wide range of journals, most of them not Jewish at all, extending over half a century. I certainly didn't have time to read all the material prior to departing for Jerusalem. So I assembled it all in 2 great big loose leaf notebooks, dispatched it by FedEx, and prayed that it wouldn't get lost. Day after day, beginning in September of 2016, I sat in my office on the campus of the Hebrew University Institute for Advanced Studies and read Cora Wilburn's voluminous writings chronologically from the beginning until the end. And in due course, I reached her serialized novel, Cosella Wayne. I think we have a slide there next. In the banner of light, there it is. I came to this. And it began on the front page, as you can see, of the March 31st, 1860 issue of the Banner of Light, a weekly journal of romance literature and general intelligence. It's actually a very hard journal to find. I think there are only 2 surviving copies, but thanks to the internet, it's now there, and you can read it all. This novel immediately captured my attention because its central characters were Jews, and it soon dawned on me that nothing resembling this novel exists in the meager canon of 19th century American Jewish fiction. The novel anticipates central themes of American Jewish writing: intermarriage, generational tension, family dysfunction, Jewish-Christian relations, immigration, poverty, the place of women in Jewish life, the rise of romantic love, the tension between destiny and free will. The novel provides thick descriptions of Jewish rituals, as well as Jewish communities around the world, and it introduces readers to Jewish texts that were little available at that time in English, such as the Ethics of the Fathers, or what we call in Hebrew, Pirkei Avot. The only full-length biographical article that I found concerning Cora Wilburn was published in 1912, just a little after her death, and it included tantalizing quotations from a diary that Cora Wilburn kept.
Might that diary survive? I wondered hopefully. I searched in all of the obvious places. I wrote to Stephanie, and I wrote to a lot of local archives, and I even wrote to some pretty obscure places. No success. And then I chanced upon a handwritten letter sent to historian Jacob Rader Marcus. I think we have a slide of that letter next. Yeah, there it is. This letter, Marcus was the founder of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, and this letter was sent by a very prominent Boston Jewish woman named Sadie Cohen. She died in 1959. Some will know that she was the widow of Judge A.K. Cohen of Boston, a very prominent figure, especially at Shalom and in the Boston area. Sadie Cohen thanked Dr. Marcus for letting her know that the papers of the Diary of Cora Wilburn had been received with the minutes of the Beth El Synagogue. Now, the diaries of little-known women back in the 1950s were not cataloged separately at the American Jewish Archives. Maybe women hadn't been invented yet in those days, but archivist Kevin Prophet, who was the archivist whom I wrote to, saw a clue in the letter, so did I, and the clue was Beth El Synagogue, which they did have the box Beth El Synagogue, and he looked there, as I suggested, and in it, he had no trouble locating this long overlooked item. And one of these happy moments that historians have, he sent me an email, found it, and then he sent me a scanned copy of the diary. Next slide, please. Let's try another slide. Keep going. Oh, did we lose? Oh, I guess we lost the copy. Oh, well, you'll have to believe me. We once had a slide of the picture of the diary. I guess it must have gotten lost. Thanks to this diary, which covers the precise time period of the novel and was clearly its central source, I was able to fill in many blanks concerning Cora Wilburn, including much of the information that I shared with you this evening. So why, you may wonder? She's an interesting person, very rare, first woman novelist. Why was Cora Wilburn forgotten, given all that she wrote and did? And my sense is that American Jewish history has often been unkind to individuals, women in particular, who failed to live up to our community's shifting ideals. Subversives, the independent-minded. Boy, was Cora Wilburn independent-minded. The transgressors, yes, she apostatized and became a Catholic, even though she later returned. And she didn't get married. Well, those kinds of people have often been banished from cultural memory. And that, I think, more than anything else, may account for the forgetting of Cora Wilburn. But the time has now come, I think, to read and remember her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that fascinating presentation. I am dying to read the book myself and to learn more about Cora. Before we get to questions from you in the audience, and just a reminder to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in questions. But before we get to questions, I did want to mention another free webinar from the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center called Jewish Immigrants in the American Antiques Trade. That's next month on November 17th. You can find information and registration for the webinar on our website, jewishheritagecenter.org, and we hope you'll join us for that. Now, let's turn to some of your questions. One second, we did have some questions come in. So we have a question from Diana, Jonathan, who is curious about what gems were metaphorically included in the book Spiritual Significance of Gems. And she had a follow-up question too about the where the book was.
I gave you, you probably know more about gems than I did. By the way, you can probably find it online on the Hathi Trust. I mentioned two of those, and let me find them. One, of course, was diamonds, but she goes through, I think, sapphire, diamond, but she goes through quite a few others there. And I think I listed more in the book, but the volume itself, while rare, exists. And because her father was a gem dealer, she knew her gems. So then there's a follow-up. So what was the follow-up?
The follow-up question was that the book, the front of the book that you showed us said it was published in Hopedale, Massachusetts. And Diana's wondering if there's any significance of that town for Jews or spiritualists.
Yeah, I know Diana, who always asks good questions. It's a very good question. I assumed that there was a small printing press there, and that's why she printed it there. It might be worth doing a little more research on that question. She had friends, mostly not Jewish friends, spiritualist friends all over. You know, these spiritualist women formed a community, and they helped one another. And my assumption was that one of those spiritualist women friends probably was able to help her. But Diana, if you know more about Hopedale, that would be great. Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Margaret, who asks if you are seeing interest in the academic community to pick up Cora's story.
Well, the book has only recently come out, and it takes time before people kind of respond to it. I've heard that one or two people are teaching it, and there have been a few reviews. COVID has not helped me here. It's much harder to talk about a new book. I'm so grateful to Rachel, but I can't exactly run around with the book. But, you know, books rise to their own level, and I'm hoping over time that people will pick up the story. There are lots of folks looking in literature for people to study, and there's really a lot of material that exists. So if anybody's interested, write me an email. Mm-hmm.
Kimberly wants to know where you learned about Cora's social justice views, in her diary or in newspaper articles.
No, it's really in her articles. She, in addition to being a novelist, and some of it comes through in the novels, she wrote essays and poems. I mean, for example, she has a poem
in William Lloyd Garrison's Abolitionist Journal. Until now, many people thought that no Jew wrote in Garrison's journal, because Garrison, although a great figure as an abolitionist, unfortunately was quite anti-Jewish. But it turns out that Cora Wilburn published a much reprinted poem there about a slave mother bewailing the fact that her own child was ripped from her. And she knew slavery at first hand because she'd seen it in Latin America, even though she didn't live in the South. And there are lots of other social justice causes that she talks about. And in the introduction to the book, which is much longer than I could present here, I have a lot more on that subject. And as I say, I have her essays too. Yeah.
Nancy asks if Cora ever had an intimate relationship with anyone.
Well, she is not known to have married. There are a few novels where she sort of talked about marriage, and I think the romance side of marriage and the idea that she'd have someone to share her life with may have interested her, but my reading, which of course I cannot prove, was that she was deeply scarred by her father and by the life she saw in her parental home. But it's interesting, a lot of spiritualists, again, I talk about that in the full introduction, talk about single blessedness. A woman doesn't have to marry. And remember, in the 19th century, when women married, they lost a lot of their independence. And she was fiercely independent. And I think you'll find the literature on spiritualists makes a big point of the fact that it legitimated being single. And all I can say with is that she was single, and no evidence that she married. And I suspect that those references to romance and marriage, which are not so much found in this novel as in others, they were meant just to sell. That's what the public wanted. And so she provided it. It's not deeply persuasive. And in other places, excuse me, she makes rather negative comments about marriage.
You mentioned that she was fiercely independent, and Cosella Wayne is as well. And they both women strike me as sort of proto-feminists, and I wonder whether feminist historians have picked up Cora's story at all yet, or whether you think that she should be returned to or entered into that area of inquiry as well.
Absolutely, no question in my mind that feminist historians should pick her up. Anne Browder at Harvard, who has written on spiritualism as a woman's movement and really kind of put that on the map, she actually mentions Cora Wilburn, but she had not found all of the material that I did. Indeed, I had the privilege of presenting this material at Harvard, and she was the commentator, and she talked about how exciting it was that one of the characters in her book turned out to have a diary and all of this rich material. But I am really hoping that feminists will pick up on Cora Wilburn. I think that there are pieces of her writing that will absolutely speak to contemporary women. She was much ahead of herself. It's easy to see parallels to things that we assume only began in the 20th century, and to realize that there were women thinking about this in the 19th century.
We have time for just another couple of questions. We have one here: was spiritualism an international movement, or was it largely focused in just America?
Well, first of all, I should make clear, if I hinted that it was past, I don't. There are still spiritualists. If you Google spiritualism, you'll find a discussion. I actually had an email from someone who thanked me for shedding so much light on Cora Wilburn. So I don't think it's a major religion, but there are still spiritualists. And indeed, someone told me that right here in Newton, there is a significant spiritualist woman, and goes into a trance and does many of the things that are talked about in the book. It was international. There's an important group of spiritualists in England, and I think that there were women who took solace in this religion in other countries. Of course, it made a lot of sense in this period of the 19th century because the telegraph had just been invented. And if there could be electrical impulses in the air that I don't see, why shouldn't there be spirits that I don't see? It was perfectly in sync with the science of the time. So it was important, but its real significance, I think, twofold. Number one, I suggest in the introduction that it had more influence on Reform Judaism than we realize. And it's not accident to me that she moved into Reform Judaism. It too becomes very interested in social justice and attracts women who are disaffected with orthodoxy and so on. So spiritualism, I think, has a kind of afterlife in Jewish life. But I think for a lot of women who were dissatisfied with very male-oriented religions where only men had the important roles, a religion like spiritualism that gave important roles to women became very valuable. And of course, we know that deaconesses and in Judaism, Hadassah, the women's organization, and other places as well, the idea that we should nurture the spiritual lives of women and attract them in, that becomes very important in religion in the United States, where, after all, many more women than men went to church in Christianity. So the idea of the life of the spirit is important, even if spiritualism never becomes enormously popular. Its heyday is the Civil War, for the obvious reason. A lot of people lost children in the Civil War, tragically, and a movement that said, hey, I can put you in touch with the spirit of your lost husband or child,
obviously attracted many adherents.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you've done to restore Cora and this novel. I had one last question, Jonathan, which is that you said at the beginning that you might tell us where you found that elusive, the one existing picture of it.
You know, I had been working for years. I was so eager to figure out where you know, what she looked like. And I couldn't find anywhere. And then in one of these spiritualist magazines, it said, and we had a slide there, it was the first slide, maybe you want to bring it back with all those pictures, that next week we're going to display pictures of our writers. So I said, well, maybe they have a picture of Cora Wilburn. So it turned out that Brandeis had it online. Naturally, that page was missing. So I said, okay, we're in Boston, not so far from the American Antiquarian Society. I emailed them. They said, oh, we have the issue, but someone ripped out the pictures, which, by the way, was very, very common. I go to Harvard, same story. Someone had ripped out the pictures. In the 19th century, journals with pictures were rare. And, you know, I was sure it must be there. Why can't I get it? And then literally in the middle of the night, I said, Dummkopf, the place to go is the Library of Congress, because the Library of Congress gets everything, but not many people use it. And it's much harder to deface something in the Library of Congress. And since my mother was a librarian and archivist, once did archives at the society here, I knew how to write to the librarian. I write to the person at the Library of Congress. I say, Harvard doesn't have it. The American Antiquarian Society doesn't have it. Brandeis doesn't have it. I knew every librarian would drop whatever they're doing, run to the stacks, and within 24 hours, I get an email. The Library of Congress has it, and here it is. And she sent me a scan, and that is the only known picture of Cora Wilburn. The lesson for a historian is never give up. I teach it to my students. You gotta have faith. One day I'll find it. And you keep trying, and you never know. You try like a detective. Every angle, maybe one of them will work out. And so in the course of that research, I found the novel, the diary, and that picture, which kind of satisfied the historian as a detective that has always intrigued me, and I think many historians.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions this evening. And I want to thank all of you in our audience for joining us and sharing this fascinating talk with us. You will be receiving an email after the webinar with information about where to buy the book. There were notes in the Q&A field with that information, but we will follow up with that information as well, and how to receive a 30% discount on the book. The email will also invite you to take a very brief survey about the program, and we do appreciate your taking the time to fill out the survey, as your feedback is really helpful to us in developing further programming. I also want to mention that this free webinar was made possible by contributions to the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center and to New England Historic Genealogical Society from people all over the world. We hope that you will consider making a donation of your own to help us continue offering more free programs like this one. I invite you to learn more about the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center on our website at jewishheritagecenter.org. We hope you'll join us again soon. Until then, please stay healthy and thank you so much. Have a nice evening.